Thank you very much. Hello everybody, my name is Delgado Rodriguez and I'm a master student at the LMU Munich, and today I would like to present our paper called Communicating Device Confidence Level and Upcoming Re-Authentications in Continuous Authentication Systems on Mobile Devices, which is based on the findings of my bachelor thesis. So imagine you leave your unlocked phone in a public space, for example, a coffee shop or your workspace. Someone could pick up this phone and steal sensitive data from it. But if your device uses continuous authentication, it would recognize this intrusion and it could restrict the access to the attacker in a few seconds. This would be great, wouldn't it? So now imagine this same great continuous authentication system does falsely detect you as an intruder to your own device. So it could restrict your access to your own phone mid-task and trigger re-authentication. Wouldn't that annoy you? Well, you see, there's an obvious trade-off between usability and security in this topic. That's why we aimed at reducing the annoyance caused by re-authentication interrupts with our investigation. So coming back to our here presented publication, you might have noticed that our title contains very much information. So I use it as a guideline for introducing the topic of our research to you. Therefore, I would like to start with a brief introduction of the current authentication on mobile devices. So currently, authentication on a smartphone consists in an explicit authentication at the beginning of each usage session, which is normally based on secrets, tokens, or biometrics. But this method has shown to have some challenges, because it firstly causes an overhead of authentications, because most usage sessions don't include an access to sensitive data, and it secondly also provided limited security, because there's no further security mechanism after unlocking the phone. So this is where continuous authentication comes in, which is a much investigated approach with the ability to reduce the authentication overhead and increase the provided security. There are two basic approaches on continuous authentication, which are context-aware and behavioral biometrics. Please note here that I will use the terms implicit authentication and continuous authentication interchangeably. So the first approach, the context-aware implicit authentication, is where the device continuously detects the current usage context, and it activates different unlocking methods depending on the context. So if a context is insecure, it will choose a more secure authentication method. The second approach, behavioral biometric implicit authentication, is where the system continuously compares the current usage with the device owner's behavior pattern. So based on this comparison, the so-called device confidence level is calculated. If the device confidence level falls below the authentication threshold, the implicit authentication failed. So both approaches might need an explicit re-authentication. So does implicit authentication really reduce the number of explicit ones? Well, this depends on the use case. If implicit authentication is used by former no authentication users as a sole method of authentication, then the user has to do only a few re-authentications if the implicit system fails. But if it is used by former explicit authentication users as a second barrier of security, then some additional re-authentications will be triggered, so it will increase the number of explicit authentications. But what is the extent of the security increase provided by implicit authentication? This depends on the behavior of the system if an implicit authentication fails. So normally, if this happens, an explicit re-authentication will be triggered as a fallback method. Most system designs, like for example, Android Smart Lock, don't trigger an immediate re-authentication, but delay it to the beginning of the next usage session. So it provides only a minor security increase compared to explicit authentication at the beginning of each usage session. To avoid this, other researchers have suggested an immediate re-authentication, which could interrupt the user mid-task. It therefore avoids further access of an attacker and causes a major security increase. So this is why we chose the immediate re-authentication as a topic for further investigations. But if an implicit authentication system fails at identifying an authorized user, then this interruption will cause obvious usability issues. Researchers have found 3 main usability issues of implicit authentication. The first one is the missing possibility to influence the timing of a re-authentication. The second one is the unpredictability of interruptions. And the third one is the sensation of not being correctly informed about the current state of the system. All these 3 issues caused annoyance of users. So we therefore developed a concept which aims at reducing this caused annoyance, based on a focus group discussion with 5 participants. This concept includes, first, the possibility of re-authenticating voluntarily at any time to avoid forced interruptions. Second, the shortened announcement of an imminent re-authentication, including a grace period, which allows the user to finish the task. And third, the long-term indication of the current system status, which shows that the system is running correctly. So after introducing this topic, the last part of our title is now covered, and I would like to further specify the research we conducted based on it. We derived 4 major research questions based on this topic. First one is, can indicators reduce annoyance caused by unpredictable re-authentication requests? Second one, are there other factors influencing this annoyance, for example, the location of the user, or the interrupted task itself, or the importance and the sensitivity of the task? And third, do indicators nudge users to re-authenticate voluntarily and therefore avoid forced interruptions? And fourth, how the users perceive and respond to the introduction of voluntary re-authentication. We therefore developed a prototype for evaluating these research questions. Our prototype was called Authenticator, and it is basically an Android app which simulates a behavioral biometric implicit authentication system on touch basis. So it reacts to touch interactions by modifying the device confidence level by chance. If this device confidence level falls below the authentication threshold, in our case 20%, a re-authentication is triggered, which will happen by locking the screen. So our prototype also included some in situ experience sampling screens on the interrupted task, on the importance and sensitivity of the interrupted task and the annoyance caused by the interruptions, and the current location of the user. These screens were triggered after a re-authentication, but maximum 3 times per day. Based on our concept, we implemented 4 experimental conditions in this prototype. The first condition is the no indicator condition, which is the first baseline of evaluation and includes no indication. The second one is a short-term indicator condition, which announces an imminent re-authentication, and it is our second baseline based on the best condition of a research conducted by Agarwal et al., and it is a SOUPS paper from 2016. Next one is the long-term indicator condition, which visualizes the device confidence level at any time. And the last one is the combination of both indicators, so short and long-term indicator combined. But how exactly did we implement these conditions? So the first one, the no indicator condition, includes no announcement of re-authentications and no indication of the device confidence level as a system status. It only has a basic notification with a neutral system in the status bar. So it's basically perceived as a sudden locking of the screen. The second condition is a short-term indicator, which, if there is no imminent re-authentication, is exactly the same than the no indicator condition. But if there is a re-authentication triggered, then a notification will pop up, which contains the current device confidence level and a shortcut to enable immediate voluntary re-authentication. The screen will also start to dim out gradually, providing an 8-second grace period for the user to finish the task, as you can see here. After this grace period, the screen will be locked and an explicit re-authentication will be necessary. The third condition is a long-term indicator, which indicates the current device confidence level through a shield symbol in the status bar. It contains a notification, which is the same as a short-term indicator condition. The fourth and last condition is a combination of both, so it has first the indication of the device confidence level at any time, and second, it announces an imminent re-authentication by the pop-up notification and gradually dimming out the screen, as you can again see here. And again, the screen will be locked after this grace period, so an explicit re-authentication will be necessary. We evaluated then this prototype through a user study, which was a within subject field study with 32 participants. As before mentioned, the dependent variable of our research was the type of indicator, so we had the 4 conditions, which included the 2 baselines I mentioned before, the no indicator and the short-term indicator. So this is the timeline of our field study. After installing the app, the participants tested each condition for 1 week, so we had a total duration of 4 weeks. The participants had to also fill in an online survey at the end of each condition. An additional online survey at the start of the field study was used to determine their demographics. And the final survey was also used to compare all indicators and evaluate the implicit authentication in general. The order was counterbalanced by applying a letting square. So during the user study, we collected both quantitative and qualitative data. For example, on the device usage, such as the unlocks, the touches on the screen, the executed apps, or on the re-authentications, whether they were voluntary or not, which was the interrupted app. We also gathered the before-mentioned experience sampling responses and the online questionnaires and some optional final interviews. So through our user study, we were able to gain some interesting insights. First of all, I would like to briefly comment on the participants' perception of our indicators. When asked about the personal preference, most participants preferred our indicators over having no indication. The exact ranking was the combination of both indicators first, on second place the long-term indicator, on third place the short-term indicator, and last, no indication. So users felt particularly motivated to re-authenticate voluntarily by the combination of both indicators too. The topic that motivated our research was annoyance, but we did not find any significant effects of our indicators on the annoyance. However, we did find significant correlations between the importance of the interrupted task and the annoyance caused by the interruption, and the sensitivity of the interrupted task, and again the annoyance, as can be seen in this graphic over here. Annoyance was also strongly influenced by the interrupted task itself. So as can be seen here, the task group nothing voluntary, which reported that the user was doing like nothing important in this moment, was perceived as a significantly less annoying interruption than all other tasks. Next, I would like to discuss voluntary re-authentication in general, because it was perceived as not less annoying in the experience samplings, but it was mentioned by participants as a positive feature. It was also often used. 1/3 of our re-authentications were voluntary. Voluntary re-authentication was also positively impacted by all our indicators because they increased the number of voluntary re-authentications compared to the no indicator condition. Now the final implications of our work. In summary, we derived 3 main design recommendations regarding the scheduling of re-authentications. The first one is consider the sensitivity of the task. So if accessing non-sensitive data, for example, while reading, a re-authentication could be delayed or triggered when the task is finished. But while accessing sensitive data, for example, a banking app, an immediate re-authentication should directly restrict further access to avoid unauthorized access. Second, consider also the importance of the task, as we found that the interruption of important tasks was particularly perceived as annoying by our participants. So selectively delaying such interruptions could improve the user's experience with the system. The third design recommendation is that you could use the recent changes in the device confidence level as a kind of indicator, because a sudden decrease in the device confidence level most likely corresponds to an intruder taking hold of the device. But this one is a speculative assumption, so further research is necessary to prove it. To finish my task, I would like to briefly summarize our research. So we investigated the impact of a long-term indication of the device confidence level, a short-term announcement of imminent re-authentication, and the possibility of re-authenticating voluntarily on users' perception of re-authentication. We found that all three indicators were preferred to no indication. The annoyance is influenced by first, the sensitivity, second, the importance, and third, the interrupted task itself. We also found a positive effect of all our indicators on the use of voluntary re-authentications. And finally, we also found that voluntary re-authentication was perceived as a positive feature and used to a considerable extent. So at this point, I would like to finish my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention, and I would be happy to answer your questions.
Hi, I'm Gus Andrews.
Hello.
Thank you. This is a really novel topic. I appreciate it. I'm wondering, and this may be out of the scope of this immediate analysis, did you do a thought exercise or a run-through of what would happen, of how this would perform in the hands of an attacker? Because it seems to me like a notification like, hey, you need to re-authenticate, would spur an attacker who has the phone to do their task faster, and so that they don't have to do that.
Yeah, this is actually a topic we recommended for further research too in our paper. Because, yeah, if you see, for example, the development of the device confidence level, it could be used as a cue maybe. But, yeah, we tried to avoid this a little bit by using the symbol only at certain few levels. So you don't see an immediate change, but only like a 20% change.
Jim Fenton, thank you for, for this talk. Re-authentication is one of those areas where security is seen to be diametrically opposed to usability, and we get a lot of pushback when we try and impose these requirements and try and figure out how to do it as gently as possible. One of the things, especially on mobile devices, that we get questions about is whether the lock screen of the device should be considered a re-authentication for an application running on that device. One of the difficulties in doing that is that the application usually doesn't have access, as far as I know, to the information about what the lock screen requirements were. You know, does the screen actually lock up? Unless it's a managed device, in which case that's controlled. Mm-hmm. Have you done any looking into or been thinking at all about how to aggregate re-authentications together between applications on the same device in order to avoid having users have to re-authenticate in several places when they're multitasking?
So you're referring to an app-based approach? Like re-authentication for each app?
Individual apps that are running on the device would probably need to prompt themselves because they don't have information about the other things that are running or what's been happening at the device level.
Yeah. Well, we investigated more like a system-wide system, so not for app-based approaches. But yeah, I can take a look at it. And
anyhow, thank you.
So some mobile systems have explicit authentication barriers when accessing sensitive data. I'm most familiar with iOS, which has local authentication and user presence protected keychain items. How do you feel about that sort of more ambient level of authentication versus this kind of more explicit model?
Well, I do think that for some apps, like for example a banking app, it will always be really important to have maybe a second barrier. But I do think that implicit authentication would be like a more fluid approach, for example, for persons who avoid re-authentications at the beginning, because we also found in the related work that like 40% of all persons don't use any authentication. So maybe for these persons, an implicit authentication is like the best approach. But if you want like the most secure approach and added like app-based re-authentication will always be, yeah, more secure.
Can I follow up? So are you suggesting that we have, in addition to sort of device authentication, a separate mechanism with separate secrets? Because, like, again, at least, again, on iOS, the user presence test is basically the same test that you do to unlock your device. So it's the same secret and therefore the same bar for authentication. So banking apps can request Touch ID, Face ID, or a specific passcode. Do you feel that that should be separated somehow?
Yeah, I do think that this second barrier of authentication should be like using another authentication method normally. We didn't do this because we had to lock the screen, because we didn't want to like root the devices of our participants. So we used the lock screen, but we would recommend use another, for example, and stronger PIN for this implicit authentication or the re-authentications in general. So it would be two different pins, for example.
Yeah.
Okay, and I will conclude with one last question. I'm interested, since you showed users those percentage scores, the confidence scores, do you think one of the reasons that there was a lot of re-authentication was because people saw that score and they were like, oh, I really want to convince my phone that it's me. I want it to be higher.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering if you got any feedback or heard anything from participants that said they were really like paying attention to that number and wanted to prove to their phone and to your experiment that it was really them.
Yeah. We actually did gather a lot of feedback on this. So yeah, many participants were nudged to voluntary re-authenticate to keep this level high. But we also had some participants that said, yeah, it wasn't important for me. So it was very mixed. Okay.
Okay, thank you again.